am Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. And on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the generational cycle of trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, parenting the most challenging kids. Do you have a child who exhibits challenging behaviors? Do you receive phone calls from your child's school about their behavior? Does your child have strong emotions that challenge you? Has your child ever been suspended or expelled from school? Is your child labeled strong-willed, spirited, highly sensitive, neurodivergent? Then this episode is for you. I am speaking with Dayna Abraham, a gem of a person with a big heart and dedication to helping children. She is a best-selling author of the Super Kids Activity Guide to Conquering Every Day and Sensory Processing 101. Dayna is on a mission to create a more accepting world, one challenging kid at a time. Her latest book, Calm the Chaos, a fail-proof roadmap for parenting even the most challenging kids, was just released in August of 2023, if you're listening in real time. As a national board-certified educator, parent of 3 neurodivergent children, and an ADHD adult herself, Dayna brings a unique and out-of-the-box perspective to parents raising kids in the modern world. She's the founder of the popular parenting website, Lemon Lime Adventures, which has accumulated more than 41 million viewers in less than 7 years. Through her compassionate framework, Calm the Chaos, she has helped millions of desperate parents around the world find peace and meet their children where they're at when conventional parenting tools have failed them. Her work has been showcased in HuffPost, Scary Mommy, BuzzFeed, Attitude Magazine, and Positive Parenting Solutions. In today's conversation, Dayna talks about her Calm the Chaos framework, her own upbringing, how she felt different and didn't feel like she fit in at school or at home, and her parenting journey, particularly with her firstborn son. Before age 11, when he officially got a diagnosis, he was largely misunderstood and mistreated in various schools. Dayna and her family tried desperately to find help for him. They themselves tried different parenting approaches. My hope by sharing Dayna's story is to help someone in a similar situation to maybe learn from her struggles and save unnecessary suffering if possible. I hope you'll find this at times heart-wrenching and chilling story relatable, reassuring, and helpful. Please enjoy. Dayna, I'm super excited to speak with you. I know you are a neurodivergent individual. I want to start right from the beginning, go into a deep end of the pool, so to speak. I want to know, what was it like growing up and being different, and how it felt for you?
Oh, that's such a good question. Growing up from an incredibly young age, I didn't feel like I fit my family, and I didn't feel like I fit at school. I danced. It was the thing that my mom put me in, and it was like my only kind of bucket I could put myself in. I was a dancer, and so I could identify as that, but I still didn't feel like I truly fit. I really battled with my self-worth, my self-esteem. I was always trying to kind of mimic what others were doing to see, oh, maybe that's what I'm supposed to be doing to fit in, or maybe that's what I'm supposed to be doing to fit in. And it was probably about junior high where I was like, you know what, I'm done. I am done trying to fit in. This is who I'm going to be. You either like me for me or you don't like me. And on the outside, I had that persona of you either like me or you don't like me, take it or leave it. That's what you get. But on the inside, I hadn't truly accepted it. And I think it wasn't until probably just a couple of years ago I really started accepting who I am, every piece of me, and kind of shedding some of that trauma from my childhood and my past of you don't fit in, you're not enough, you don't belong, you're too loud, you're too this, you're too emotional. I got grounded when I was a kid because I cried too much. So, like, I mean, that's the type of stuff I'm talking about. I was really sensory seeking. So I would touch things a lot. And my mom, when I'd be in quote unquote trouble, she would make you look at her, right? Like, look at me when I'm talking to you. Don't fidget when I'm talking to you. And I couldn't not fidget and I couldn't look at her and still have that conversation. When my brothers would get in trouble, I would take the blame because I didn't want them to get in trouble. So I would take like the spankings or I would take the groundings or because I couldn't stand seeing them get hurt. So just big emotions. Didn't read a book until I was a junior in college. And I loved the idea of reading, but I never understood why I couldn't read. And it wasn't until I was older and discovered audiobooks that I was like, oh, my brain just doesn't work that way. So yeah, so growing up, it was hard. I mean, I definitely had a lot of like self-loathing thoughts and also self-harming behaviors.
And your parents, I mean, and what was the time frame at this time? I think people didn't have enough understanding, I guess, or there wasn't much diagnosing going on. Where did you grow up? Which state did you grow up?
I grew up in Arkansas, so in the South in the United States. My mom was neurodivergent. She was never diagnosed with anything, but I mean, she was incredibly creative. She was what we call the black sheep of the family, right? Like my family, my grandparents, they were well-to-do. They had worked really hard to create a business. And my mom was the creative, the one who didn't really fit the mold in her family. And so she wanted so bad for her kids to fit. And so she really tried to force us into a box because of what the pain she had been through. And so my older brother was adopted and he was diagnosed not until he was older as bipolar. So he was incredibly explosive. And he was probably in some of those first kids diagnosed with ADHD in the 70s, taking Ritalin, and that was all there was. And so he was the one with a diagnosis. He was the one that was taking all the family energy. And I was at kind of the end of all of his explosions. And so no one would have ever diagnosed me growing up. One, I think girls really struggled to get diagnosed. I was a straight A student until I wasn't. And that's why it felt like something must be broken with me because I was getting the grades. I was doing the things. I was, on paper, everything looked right. And, according to my mom, she would praise me to all her friends, but behind the scenes, she would like really tear down all the things that didn't quite fit the mold. And that was really hard trying to figure out where I fit and who I was.
And then fast forward, you become a parent and you have a kid who is different, like you call out of the box child. And at this point, when you become a mom, did you start working on yourself already? Since this was your firstborn, right? Who had challenges like, no, you hadn't looked at your childhood or processed anything, and you have this child. So tell me how that provoked you and what was that experience for you when you were getting phone calls and your child was being suspended. And I know a lot of moms who go through this. They get a phone call every day. Come pick up your kid is in trouble. Your kid is this, that kid that you call that kid. We all know those kinds of kids. And so like, how was that for you? Did you connect the dots that like your mom was neurodivergent, I am, my kid, like where did this all come together?
This was 10 years ago when it hit ahead and I took my son out of school. So 10 years ago, the term neurodivergent was not used very much. It was there, but it was not a common term. And there wasn't a lot of information on challenging kids and kids that didn't fit the mold and kids that had these challenging behaviors. They There was just not a lot of resources. There was one or two books on sensory processing at the time. So when I first had my first son, I was an educator. I'd been in the classroom for 12 years. So I had this background of education, child development, and my favorite kids were the kids who struggled. So when I had him, I honestly believed I was going to be the world's best parent. Like, I was like, I got this down. Like, my favorite kids are the ones that struggled. My brother struggled. I knew how to help him. Like, we're good. I am going to be the world's best parent. No, that did not happen. Instead, I truly felt like I couldn't do anything right. And I tried everything that aligned with my values, everything I knew from child development and peaceful strategies and respectful strategies. And, conscious discipline was something that was prevalent in the classroom back then. I used project approach in the classroom. So everything was very child centered. And so I tried that with my son. And for the first few years, I would say that you could say it worked. As long as we were in our house and we were doing our things, right? He was very particular. He needed things exactly just so, but I was able to pay attention to those things. And I was able to give him that and create environments that worked for him. And his dad was staying at home with him. So he was either with me when I was home or with his dad when I was at work. And so we weren't having to worry about anyone that didn't understand him yet. It was once he got into preschool and he had to be around other kids and he had to be around other situations and environments that it really felt like it was our parenting. Like we had somehow ruined him. We had somehow done this where he couldn't follow the rules. He couldn't stay in his seat. He couldn't make friends.
And especially for a person who already has shaky self-worth, esteem, that must feel really damaging, I could say.
It was almost like this small hole that allowed in all this extra doubt, right? And so because I didn't have that foundation myself, I wasn't able to, I didn't do any sort of mindfulness work or any inner self work at that time. And so to know myself and then to say, oh, this is my inner voice. This is my intuition. This is like what I know to be right. It just was like, fine, let me try that. Let me try this. And I was taking in all the advice from others. And so much so that eventually I just felt completely lost, which way's up, which way's down, and willing to try even things that went way against my values, like spanking or grounding or, taking things away, things that I was just like, this doesn't feel right, but maybe they're right. Maybe I should do what they're saying.
Yeah, well, because when you're desperate, you just want to find a solution and it better be quick. And you're so right. A person who has a shaky self-esteem or self-worth, it could be so tempting to look at different sources. I see this in a lot of people. You already don't have a connection to your authentic self sort of like strongly. You don't know, you don't trust your intuition. You don't know what you're feeling, what your needs are, what your voice is, what your values are. And if you're parenting from that place, it's so tempting to try this method, that method, go here, go there. Whereas like the work has to be, let me find who I am, like what are my values, what my needs are, what my emotions are. And so it's like a big work, right? Big unraveling and connecting. But I see this pattern a lot. And what would you say to someone who is in that place, who is just trying different approaches, different books, and I see that they don't even stick with one method or approach very long because a new shiny thing comes up and they're like, maybe I resonate with this better. What would you recommend to that person, like having experienced that?
Yeah, I think it is this feeling of it's all or nothing. Like it's either all going to work or none of it's going to work. And so when we get that, because we feel shaky, when we have that first ounce of this isn't going to work, our brain tries to protect us and is like, yep, get out of here. Don't use that anymore. And so I think the very first piece that I would say is one, like give yourself grace and space to test something out, to try something out, and to just be quiet with it, like sit with it and be like, does this feel right? Does this feel good? Are there things we can change? Absolutely. Are there tweaks we can make? 100%. So instead of, like, I was describing it to a parent the other day who was talking about like electronics battles. And I said, instead of looking at let's get rid of electronics and have no electronics or all electronics, what if we looked at systems that aren't working? And we went into what is working, what isn't working, and what can we tweak? And if we go into parenting and plans as looking at small tweaks we can make instead of overhauling everything, then we can make that small progress. We can make forward progress, and that forward progress gives us momentum. And then that momentum gives us confidence. And then that confidence gives us the mastery in this skill or in this technique. And so again, it's that like, just give yourself that space and grace to test things out, to try things out, and forgive yourself if you make mistakes, because we're all human.
Yeah. I mean, this constant need to look outside of yourself for solutions is not a good place to be. I think the opposite needs to happen, connecting to yourself, looking inwards. That may take some time, right? But there is no fix out there. But the culture always tells us, unfortunately, this is so ingrained in the Western American culture, right? There's a problem outside of you. You can buy this product. You can do this program. You can do this cleanse. You can go to this retreat. Everything will be fine. And for a person who already has that shaky self-esteem and unworthiness and feels broken inside, it's like, but this didn't work. So therefore, the problem is me again. And so it just perpetuates the same pattern, the same idea. So what I like about your book, your work, is you don't give prescriptions and you take into consideration that each family is unique, each child is different. Let's work on general principles and see what helps you, and you can customize. So I think this is a good jumping place to your framework, Calm the Chaos framework. Do you want to give a short overview what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were talking, I was thinking, it goes back to that all or nothing. Like, we don't want to give all our power away to outside sources, but we also don't want to shut off all information from the outside. So we don't want no information. And especially for some of us that didn't have that model of loving and respectful and nurturing parents, we do need to know what are some of the best practices. What does science tell us? Those sorts of things. So that is where the framework comes in, is what are these core principles that if we use these core principles and couple it with our past knowledge, our expertise in our child, our expertise in ourself, our intuition, that we can find a path forward. And so in working with my son after I brought him home, it was, okay, we just need to connect. Like, this kid needs to know that he's not alone. He needs to know I see him for who he is. And that's where I started, was that deep connection. And I'm not talking about like playtime. I'm talking about truly accepting him for who he is.
And was that hard, that process for you, because you were getting those messages from outside? Were you also thinking, what's wrong with my kid? Because oftentimes people think that. I have a client who says, what's wrong with my kid? Like, we've tried everything, nothing works. And my child doesn't add, she said this the other day, any value into my life. And my heart just sank. I'm like, wow, what a desperate place to be to say those statements.
I have heard the parents that I work with have definitely come to me at that place. I think because of my education background. And I think because I came from a place where I always said this, my favorite people in life are the ones that never fit in. So for me, I always saw value.
Because it's home for you, right? You feel connected.
Yeah. So for me, the misfits are my people. And so with my son not fitting in, I never was like, what's wrong with him? It was, what are we not doing to support him and help him? And so I had that basis, right? And I know a lot of parents don't, but I did have that basis. And that was just innate in me. And so then for me, it was that connection piece. And the connection really, to me, I don't think was as hard, because early childhood, right? Like, play is part of my like love language, and seeing him for who he was, that part of connection was not hard for me either, just because I desperately needed it myself. So it was healing to see him for who he was.
Wow, that's huge. Hold on. I think that needs highlighting right there. I think that's an important statement that you said. And I think we can orient ourselves. We can manufacture that feeling if it doesn't come naturally. I've seen people do that. You can frame it differently and say, I am going to heal myself through this journey of parenting my child. You said it more beautifully, and I really want that point to be highlighted. I think it's an important statement. It can be very hard for people to connect to their children for various reasons, for their own, for their child being bad and hasn't gotten so long that everybody's disconnected and like resentment, anger is built up. A lot of times parents have told me, oh, I want to just send my kid to a residential home. I just want to send them away. And I just want to also normalize people's suffering, having difficult, challenging children with special needs. It's not easy. It takes a lot for people to parent challenging kids and run businesses, find a job, work, and just exist in the world. I think it's super challenging. There is a movie I can recommend here. Maybe you've seen it too. It's based on a true story. I watched that movie and it made a huge impact on me about the kid who was misunderstood and the parents were doing everything. And the schools were calling and he was being expelled and suspended. They moved to schools multiple times. The other parents were judging this family. This mom was excluded from everywhere. This kid was having outbursts in the family. Other siblings were being scared and everything was falling apart. And I don't want to give out the whole movie, how it ends, what they discover. It's called No Letting Go. I think that's the name of the movie, based on a true story of this family. And it really shows how parents find their children eventually. And there is a diagnosis in this movie and things like that. So yeah, I took it a little detour, but I want to bring it back to you so that you can.
It's that curse of knowledge, right? I do this all day, every day. So I forget and I go really, really fast because and so I'm glad that you kind of slowed me down and stopped me. So thank you for that. Because now I want to go check out this movie. And it kind of, I said the thing about by connecting with my son, it allowed me to heal myself. And part of that really is because if he was lovable, it means I'm lovable. Right. And that's where that comes from, is like, if he can, and I think sometimes as parents, we think our kid is that it's a double-edged sword, because yes, we can heal ourselves, but at the same time, if for some reason we struggle to let's say I had struggled to connect with him, I could then say, oh, well, then I'm failing again. Right. And so we have to be really cautious about how much weight we put on that. By connecting with him, I healed myself. I didn't set out to do that. I set out to understand him. And now looking back 10 years later, I can go, wow, that really helped me heal by seeing that he was lovable and that he could be seen for who he is. It allowed me to kind of say, okay, I can be who I am too. And I can find systems that work for me. So the next piece is, you always hear that there's one thing, right? Like the one thing that all the other methods are getting wrong. But I honestly didn't find that. I really found that there were more than just one principle, because I could connect with him all day long, but he goes to school and he struggles, or he needs to get ready in the morning and he can't put his pants on, right? Like there's still struggles that are happening, or he was having these massive meltdowns. So we had to get to the bottom of that. So the natural next place I went to was the understanding piece as an educator. So I, really started looking at what was behind the behavior. Where was this coming from? What were the patterns I was finding? And really just doing deep dives into how could I truly understand what I was seeing, and removing all emotion from the behavior that was happening. And so that was that second pillar, was that understanding piece.
Let me slow this down some more here for you. What resources did you go first? And can you name a few resources, books that you found helpful in understanding that behavior?
One of the first ones, I used a lot of my child development stuff from when I was in the classroom. So I don't have specific resources there. But the things that I went back to is, one of the first books I read was Out of Sync Child by Carol Kranowitz. And I remember it was like a summer vacation. I was still teaching at the time, so I hadn't taken him out of school yet. But I remember reading that book because I had a child in my classroom who was the first child that I had ever taught in. I had been teaching for 10 years at that point with sensory processing disorder. I was like, what is this thing? And as I'm reading it, I'm like, that's my son. That's my son. That's my son. That's my son. Like, it was so eye-opening. And so I really started looking at that. I started looking at some emotional regulation stuff. I started diving into some of Dan Siegel's work and kind of understanding where some of these behaviors could be coming from. Definitely dove into Ross Green's work. So a lot of the greats that we still point to and go back to today to understand behavior, that was kind of where I was, the path I was led down when I first started.
And have you tried different approaches, different methods? And what were they? If you could quickly mention what you tried.
I would say, as far as methods, I would say a lot of it would land in more of like that connect and empower piece. I would say that a lot of it was missing some of that understanding piece of where the behavior was coming from. And so everything. We tried everything. So we tried, positive parenting, setting firm limits and boundaries and saying this is what it's going to be and natural consequences. We did family meetings. We did routine charts and rules and family rules. And then we would do timeouts. And then we would go the other way and we would say, okay, we're going to do timeouts. We're going to do removing things from you. We're not going to the park today because you didn't do that. So there'd be consequences. And then when at our worst, it was like, well, they all say I should spank you. Let me just try that, and I would throw my hands in the air and I would just try that because they said I wasn't being firm enough. Or if he got in trouble at school, it was like, okay, well, I'm going to take something from you at home because you were bad at school. Right. And I couldn't find anything that holistically worked. It might work for a second. But my son, I always told teachers, I was like, if you have a classroom management strategy in place, he is going to find your hole and he is going to destroy that classroom management strategy, because he was the asterisk at the time. Now, 10 years later, he's what we know about the way brains work and the way that children are developing. We know that these systems don't work now, but he was the asterisk to the system back then.
At some point, you get him diagnosed?
Yeah, that was a long process. So my son was incredibly verbal. So at 1, he spoke over 100 words in full sentences. And he was like a problem solver and he was really active and he could name every emotion. And so when we first started down the diagnosis trail, I worked on getting him a sensory processing diagnosis. Around 5, he started going to sensory therapy with an occupational therapist. We started seeing a social worker. He saw a clinical psychologist. But about 7, 8, when he was getting in a lot of trouble at school, I was like, there's more going on here. We really need to try to figure that out. Tried to get an autism diagnosis. I was told, no, he can't possibly be autistic because he looks at you. He knows his emotions. He has too many words, like all of these very stereotypical reasons why he couldn't be autistic. And then we did cognitive behavior therapy. We did, oh my goodness, so many different therapies. I believe there was another one that we tried as well. Cognitive behavior therapy, we went to this one therapist and he said, just leave him in his room. He'll be fine. He will calm down. You're feeding into it. So you just need to, when he has these fits, you don't need to reward it. You need to close the door and just let him have his fit. And so I closed the door and I waited outside and it got quiet. After a few hours, I went in and he's crying, screaming. He's probably about 10 at this point. And I walk in and he's got the window open and he's about to jump out because he just wanted it to end. And he would say that to me. I don't want to be this way. I don't want to have these fits. Make it end. And so when I say we tried everything, like we really tried a lot. Maybe not everything, but we definitely tried a lot.
No, the reason I'm asking is I want people to hear that as a parent coach, as an educator, you also struggled a lot and you tried different things. It's reassuring for people that they're not alone in their struggles and maybe they can get to the faster route, by hearing your story, they can bypass all of this unnecessary steps and therapists and things like that. What was that turning point for you when you changed everything? That's number one question. But another one I have, at what point did your son know about his diagnosis, and how did that conversation go with him, explaining what was going on for him in his brain? Like, how did you share that information with him?
Two big questions. So the turning point, it didn't happen with a big bang. It didn't happen with a big like, ta-da, it's beautiful, right? Which is why in the book, I walk parents through the roadmap of surviving to thriving, because you can't access all of this information and all of these strategies and plans and routines and things like that when you're in survival mode. You have to start there. And it does take these steps or stages to get through. And so I would say that, at 10, we had moments where it felt like everything was getting better. So at 7 was when I pulled him out of school. At 10, he was starting to get, he was at home. He wanted to go back into the school setting. So we put him back into the school setting. And at first it felt like, on paper, the school was perfect. And we did it because he wanted to. So I would say that like that time right before 7th grade. So maybe he was like 11. Yeah, he was 11. So that time right there where he was like, I want to go back into the school setting. I'm like, okay. So he was going into 6th. Took us a year for a school to accept us because he had a history of aggression. And so he already had that in his file. He already had all of that as like part of who he was. So it was really hard even for a public school to get in. We had to hire an advocate. It was a big ordeal. So he was 7th grade by the time we got him in. Looked great on paper. It was a STEM school. It had mindfulness. It had like the social thinking. It had, all these things that it was like, okay, they get it. They had a program for kids just like my kid. I was like, this is going to be perfect. What I didn't even know at the time is they also had a seclusion and isolation room, which was used as punishment, which was used as seclusion and isolation. And he was the bad guy. He would have security guards called on him that had tasers and guns in their pockets while they're trying to calm my child down. He couldn't calm down when he saw those things. And so it just got worse and worse and worse. And, there were multiple incidents where police were called on my son, where I was called. He was in the office. He had written no all over the walls, or they had him like in the prone position, they're on top of him, holding him down. Like this kid has so much educational trauma, like so much has happened to him. And at this point, there was a point where we were having just as many meltdowns at home, and I was having to take him to the hospital because I couldn't calm him. And I was so afraid for him and for our family. And it was the 3rd hospital visit that they took medical power of attorney over us, and they put him in a residential treatment without our permission. And they said, either you give us permission and you get a choice where he goes, or we take medical power of attorney and we get to choose. And so it was in that moment, though, this one's hard, but it was in that moment where I said, fine, I'll let you guys do it if I get a say. And I said, I need to know if there is a residential treatment place that understands sensory, because at that point, that's all I had a leg to stand on. We had ADHD diagnosis. We had a sensory diagnosis. We didn't have anything else. And so I said, I need a place that understands sensory. And they said, well, is he autistic? And I said, he does not have a diagnosis. And they said, okay, there's one place. They're usually full. And it's an hour away. And we'll see if we can get him in. So we were at the emergency room until 4 a.m. when another ambulance came to take him to this residential treatment place. And when I walked in the building, you get on the elevator, you come up into the waiting room, and there were 2 halls. This part's the hard part. One hall went for the kids with behavior problems, and one hall went for kids with an autism diagnosis. And my kid got put on the side with the kids who had an autism diagnosis. So he got treated like there was a solution. The other kids were treated like they were the problem. If he had gone to the other Paul, I don't know where he'd be today. I don't know what his future would have been. It was not pretty either direction, but this one hall, because he was treated as if he had a diagnosis, he was given therapies, he was given evaluations, he was finally given a diagnosis of autism. He was finally they were starting to find ways to support him. And it was hard. He says he'll never, that was the hardest time for him, is that time in that treatment center. But he also says, but that's where I finally got a diagnosis. So it's also where we learned that he had no emotional language. So even though he was highly verbal, if he was upset, he would just say, and blah, and they hit and they kapow. And so that explained why he was going from 0 to 100, because he didn't have any emotional language, even though in the moment he couldn't access it. So it gave us new resources, new supports. And so from that moment, we were able to talk about his diagnosis in a way that helped him understand a little more. When it was ADHD, when it was sensory processing, he understood it. But when he got the autism diagnosis, he really was able to latch on to that and say, oh, this is why I do what I do. Okay, I wish people realized this was just a sliver of me, right? Here's all the other cool things about me. And so from there, things started to change. And then I would say that once we found him a school that stopped treating the diagnosis and they started educating the child in front of them, we're able to soar a little bit more, because we had the support at home and we had the structures in place at home. But it was once we had some help at school too, with a school that didn't just see him as, oh, he's autistic. Okay, that means that we need to be really firm here and really strict here, and we need to do this and we need to do that. And one of the quote unquote best schools in the nation for kids with autism had a seclusion and isolation room, and he was in there the majority of the day instead of being with peers, but it wasn't until he went to an engineering high school with small class sizes, with teachers who saw that if he blows up, it's not about them, it's not a power struggle, right? He had supports in place, he had plans in place. And that's when we started to kind of really see things explode for him in a good way.
And he's 18 now and he graduated from high school, correct?
He did. He just graduated high school. He is, I don't know what's going to come next, but I don't really care right now, because we did get through that milestone. But he's a different kid now that all the educational stress is gone. Now he's talking to us more. He's hanging out with us. He's choosing to go do stuff with us more. He's coming out of his shell again. Yeah, so he graduated high school and he's doing great.
How about processing of all these traumatic experiences that he has endured? What are your thoughts on that? Has he done any work? Is he in therapy? What do you think about that?
He's not right now, and he does need to. I think that it will be really helpful for him. Right now, we both have agreed, we do a lot of agreements between us. And even if I don't think it's the number one best thing right now, I want him to be on board. So, so right now he graduated in May, it's July. This is his, as he calls it, it's my buffer. It's my, I just want to let it all out. And then I'll find a class I like. I'll find a support I need. I'll, find a job that works with the way my brain works. Okay, I'm okay with that. So we're just taking it one step at a time right now. But we talk about it. I mean, we do a lot of processing together, but there's still a lot more to process for sure.
And let me remind the listener that you also went on to have 2 more children at some point, right? How old was your first son when you had your next one?
I had 2 under 2. So my second child is just 2 years younger, almost exactly. They both have summer birthdays. And then we have a big gap because I have a second marriage. So my daughter is 10 years old. So she's 8 years younger than my son, and she's 6 years younger than my other son.
The reason I'm asking is how hard it must have been for you. This is a full-time job. This is so exhaustive and, very difficult process that you went through, and you had two children and you were parenting them too. And what was it like for you in terms of caring for yourself? Were you neglecting yourself, or you did find resources? Like, clue me in that.
Those up until like 11, 12, when he, like from 7 to 11 and 12, I did not take care of myself. I had completely lost myself. I was not showering. I was not sleeping. I was, I'd get up and it would be all about taking care of him. And then when he'd go to bed and the other two, and then the only way I was taking care of myself is that for me, I always needed something that was an outlet. So I started the blog when he was 7. And so when he'd go to bed, I would have baby in lap and I'd be typing up a blog post. And that was kind of what I did for myself. But as far as real self-care of like really taking care of my health, really taking care of my mental health and, all of those things, that didn't start until quite a few years in. It was actually when he was in residential, it was like, oh, like, look at all this time I have. It was like, I need to actually start taking care of me so I can take care of the rest of the family, so I can be there for him when things are hard.
So if today's Dayna would give advice to that Dayna when your son was 7 years old, when you were not showering, and what would you say to her?
I would say that you are worth it. And I would say that even if you just take 5 minutes to yourself a day to shower, to take your vitamins, to drink your water, to listen to yourself, and that's why in the book, there's a 5-minute energy plan, is because I think it's so important when you're in survival mode, is you're worth it. And if you don't believe that right now, at least think of it as, I have to have some juice in my battery to be able to help my kid. Right? So at least do it for your kids for now, but know that there are many of us out there that believe you're worth it. And so, to go through those motions, even when it doesn't feel like it's going to make a difference, because you don't feel like 5 minutes is going to make a difference, but it really does. Those habits, those practices early on help you have the stamina to go through whatever life throws at you.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about this surviving state as opposed to like thriving state. I feel like most parenting advice that is out there is like, they forget that they are real parents who live in a real world, who are stressed out and overwhelmed and burnt out, that they are dysregulated themselves. And yeah, if they were in a good mental health space, they would be able to use your tactics. There's a reason they're not using that. So can you speak about the importance of the survival state and taking care of that first, then?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly why this roadmap exists, is because I found that a lot of the information out there, no matter how good it is, there's some great information on self-regulation strategies and growth mindset and all these fantastic ways to help our kids thrive. But if we are in survival mode, if they're in survival mode, if we don't have trust, if we don't have a core understanding of who we are as a family, it's going to be really hard to do those things. And so most advice plops us off at stage 4 and 5. That let's work together as a family, let's problem solve, let's build skills, and let's have this thriving family that works together and goes to movies together and has vacations together, right? Whereas this is, let's just meet you where you're at. Even if you're just dealing with everyday challenges, you can still be at survival mode, which is you're struggling to remain calm. You're struggling to ride through the different struggles that come up. Your kids are triggering you. They're pushing your buttons, and you're just like, I know the material. I know I have the education, but I can't access it. That's what Ride the Storm is all about. And then that time and energy that we just talked about is that those little small bursts of energy that we can get from small habits. And that's just like a quick mindset shift or a quick boost, like going outside and stepping in the grass. They can be really, really small things, but they add up over time. And then the in the moment plan of what do you say and do in the heat of the moment to diffuse things. And all 3 of those stages don't really depend on getting your spouse on board, your kid on board, the school on board. They are all about you. And so you can take control of that no matter how bad your situation is. And that's why it's kind of set up this way, because along the way, you're building trust, you're building safety, you're building rapport. And then you're ready for stage 4 and 5, where you get your kids involved, you problem solve with them and things like that.
Can we quickly dissect an example, or do we have enough time, do you think, to apply the super quick version of the Calm the Chaos framework?
Yeah. Do you have an example you want me to use, or do you want me to just give you one?
Give me one. I don't have an example. I should have thought about one, but
I'm going to say something really quick because we kind of dove deep. Okay, so the framework is 4 pillars. It's you, which is your own thoughts and mindset, connection, understanding, and empowerment. And you need those 4 no matter what stage you're at. And a really kind of good way to look at this is the other day I was on a coaching call with a parent, and we talk about chaos causers, identifying one focus, staying focused on that one thing instead of trying to solve everything at once. And so she was like, I'm not sure which chaos causer I want to focus on. I think I want to focus on hitting. We've been seeing a lot of, it's kind of like sledgehammering. And I was like, well, to me, that sounds like it. Tell me what the other one is. She's like, well, the other one is that he like darts off and he like climbs things when we're out and about. And that's dangerous. And I said, that is dangerous. You're right. I said, I think you can create an ahead of the moment plan for that, because this is someone who's been in our world for a while. I said, I don't know that that's a full, like, let's focus on this for 90 days, right? Let's focus on the hitting one, because he's telling you he's really upset with the hitting one. So let's figure that out, because that's both he's in pain in some way and you're in pain in some way, because you're getting, right? Neither one of you are happy. Whereas like him running off, he's pretty happy with that situation. You're the one not happy with that situation. And so she was like, okay, I can see that. So if you were to, so in describing the hitting with her, I said, you're going to need a plan for how to just ride through it until you have a plan that works. So that's the ride the storm plan. That's like, how can you anchor yourself? That's the you piece of like, okay, he needs me. He's not trying to hurt me, right? Some sort of swap in the moment that helps you stay grounded. And then just your body language, instead of getting like firm and upset that he's hitting, instead just kind of relaxing your body and then stop and say nothing. You ride it out for a minute, because if he's dysregulated enough to hit, he's going to keep hitting. No amount of talking is going to stop it. And then we skip over the time and energy just because for this one, she would need to do that. But if we're doing just hitting, right? Like, let's just look at the hitting. So for the in the moment, you're going to need to know what to say, what to do. And, you know, maybe he needs something in the moment to get through that moment to diffuse it a little better. And the dad speaks up and he goes, well, I think it's happening when we say yes or no, and he wants the opposite. I said, okay, walk me through what happened the last time it happened. He goes, well, we were coming home from fireworks and he had just had ice cream. It was 2 hours past bedtime and he saw Moo's ice cream and he wanted Moo's ice cream. We can all like relate to this, right? And so the kid goes, I want Moo's. And the dad goes, no, we're not having Moo's. And I said, okay, stop right there. In the moment plan is not to say no immediately. In the moment would be, oh, I hear you want Moo's. Like, I love Moo's too. Remember, we just had ice cream. We're going to go straight home today. Let's make a plan for Moo's tomorrow. Kid's still going to go, I want Moo's. And you go, I hear you. That's hard. And so you're validating them. You're sitting with them. He's going home. He's frustrated. That's fine. Let's make a plan for Moo's when you're calm. That doesn't actually solve the problem though, right? It's just it's diffusing it a little bit. Then for ahead of the moment for Moo's, it's next time we're going somewhere, like next time we know that there's going to be a no or a yes, like let's say next time we're going home late after something, or we know we're going to be passing a place that he likes to go, we would say, all right, buddy, it's been a long day. We just did the fireworks. We just had ice cream. It was so amazing. And it's 2 hours past bedtime. We're going to get in the car and we might pass some really cool things, but we're just going to go straight home. Are you okay with that plan? Yeah, I'm okay with that plan. All right. So let's remember, when we see Moo's, what are we going to do? Oh, we're going to say, ooh, I like Moo's. Yep. I'll say I like Moo's too. Okay, great. Let's get in the car. So you're preempting what might happen. This is a super basic analogy of like what these plans would look like. There's a lot more nuance, but you get the gist of you're making a plan for the next time that might happen. And then when you move to the next stage, it's creating a system, a boundary, a plan around the hitting, right? So, now we have a plan for when I'm frustrated, I can. Now there's a better plan in place. We can practice that. We can create this plan. We can create an agreement of when you're frustrated and hitting, you need space to yourself, or mommy will sit next to you at arm's length, right? But you're making that plan after you've worked through some of the other ones.
I see. Well, thank you for giving a quick overview. That's pretty helpful. Very common example, things are so tempting in the supermarket. And
now all of your listeners want mousse.
We don't have that, I think, in our state.
I don't have it either. We don't have it either.
So I'm not familiar with that. So I don't want that.
You don't want it?
Yeah.
It's just ice cream. I just imagine any ice cream place.
Yes. So, but I'm weird. I don't like ice cream. So I'm one of those people who I don't care about ice cream. So Dayna, this is fun. I mean, I don't want to keep you here forever. It seems like we can tackle so many topics, but I'm really glad we went this route. And I've been contacted by listeners who struggle with their children, and they asked me specifically, how do I know if I have an empath, a kid who has sensory issues? Is there something wrong with my kid? Is my child a highly sensitive person? And we have other professionals now, such as Dr. Becky, introducing new terms, DFK kids. It's like people are confused. But I think the main thing is I loved your honesty and how you shared your process and what you went through. How can we end this episode with a message of hope for that parent in the trenches who is going through this or questioning their children? Who is in that struggling place when you were once? What would you say to them? Either a tip, advice, a question, words of encouragement, something like that.
I think, the number one thing that I want all parents to know is that, especially if you're listening to an episode like this, right? You're an hour into listening to an episode. Not every parent does that. If you're listening to this, you are definitely not failing, right? Like you are doing a pretty darn good job, right? And so I want you to know you're not failing and that your kid's not broken. They're exactly who they're designed to be, and you're exactly the parent they need. And even when it doesn't feel like it, I want you to remember you're not alone, that there are other people out there going through this, and that it is that one tiny step forward. It's that space and grace we talked about earlier, that forgiveness for yourself to be human, for your kid to be human, and to navigate this one step at a time instead of looking for the perfect solution, right? And if you can lean on that, you're not going to do wrong by your kid.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for saying those beautiful words. And I really loved our connection and our time here. Thank you.
You too. Thank you. It was such an honor.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. Did you learn anything new? Did this conversation resonate with you? Do you know someone who is in a similar situation, just like Dayna's family was several years ago? I love hearing from you. I welcome your feedback, comments, and questions. You can send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. You can call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for international listeners, you can use the free SpeakPipe tool on the contact page of my website, authenticparenting.com/contact. If you want to connect with your fellow listeners from around the world, engage in meaningful conversation about the show, get support and answers to your parenting questions, join the Authentic Parenting community on Facebook, a private support group for parents like you. If you enjoy the podcast and find it helpful, please take a few seconds to rate and review it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Your ratings and reviews help us get more visibility. You can show your love and support by either becoming a patron on patreon.com or by making a one-time donation by going to authenticparenting.com/support. Your contribution makes a difference. You can find the show and follow it wherever podcasts are played: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and elsewhere. And finally, if you want to know what I'm up to in my private life, see behind the scenes of podcasting, get inspiration, and simply stay connected, follow me on Instagram, the only social media platform that I use. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.